Vercassivellaunus was an Arverni chieftain, and according to Caesar, a cousin of Arverni's king, Vercingetorix. When the last of Vercingetorix's cavalry escaped the town of Alesia, just before Caesar's circumvallation closed him off from the rest of the world, at least one of the riders made it to the Arverni lands. Upon learning of the situation in Alesia, and the precarious position of his king and cousin, Vercassivellaunus immediately began raising a large force with which to relieve the besieged oppidum. Calling his generals, Commius, Verodomarus, and Eporedorix, Vercassivellaunus raised a substantial host to march against the Romans. According to Caesar's Bello Gallico, Vercassivellaunus also convinced Sedullos, chief of the Lemuvices tribe, to contribute men as well, and fielded an army of approximately 250,000 to relieve the town of Alesia. Modern estimates, however, place the battalion closer to 100,000. When the Gallic relief army arrived, near the end of September of the 52 BC year, they camped approximately 1 mile away from Caesar's contravallation. Their first priority, before they could possibly attack Caesar, was to fill in the deadly trenches Caesar's men had dug. This was accomplished the following day, allowing Vercassivellaunus to send in a small force of cavalry and infantry, in order to begin testing the outer fortifications of Caesar's camp. Caesar responded by sending out the Germanic cavalry to halt the attacks against the wall. When Vercingetorix, within the walls of Alesia, caught sight of the Gallic support army, and realized that fighting had already begun on the western side of Caesar's contravallation, he ordered his men to charge, and to distract the Romans by attacking at the same point on the circumvallation. Unfortunately, before Vercingetorix's men even made it to the first trench in no man's land, Caesar's Germanic cavalry had defeated the forces attacking the wall. Vercingetorix's men were forced to return to the city. While the first group of the Gallic relief army were engaged with Caesar's Germanic cavalry, Vercassivellaunus had others within his camp building siege ladders. When the initial attempt against the wall failed, they waited until nightfall. Under cover of darkness, Vercassivellaunus ordered a second attack, using the ladders to scale the wall, and taking the Romans by surprise. As Gauls jumped over the contravallation, and Rome's soldiers began to fall, the two commanders in charge of that section, Gaius Trebonius and Marcus Antonius, rode hard for remote forts on the wall. Rousing the men from these forts, they ushered them to the main area of attack in order to support their fighting men, before riding to get others. Again, seeing that battle had commenced, Vercingetorix sent out his men to support the strike against the wall, but they were delayed, forced to spend the majority of the night filling in Caesar's inner trenches. By the time his men finished filling the trenches, at dawn's first light, Gaius Trebonius and Marcus Antonius had rallied so many men that the Gauls, fearing they were about to be surrounded by the Romans, withdrew. Once again, Vercingetorix's men returned to Alesia. Having failed twice to breach Caesar's walls, Vercassivellaunus took some time to study the entirety of Caesar's fortifications, before attacking again. After mapping out the whole of the contravallation, Vercassivellaunus noted that the northern side of Caesar's wall was built against higher ground which could give Vercassivellaunus a tactical advantage. During his next offensive, Vercassivellaunus ordered his army to envelop the outer wall, charging all points simultaneously. As the Romans countered, widening their defenses inside the wall, Vercassivellaunus zeroed in on the northern portion, where the ground was raised, with a concentrated force of approximately 60,000 men. When the fighting began, Vercingetorix, from his elevated position, could see everything Caesar could not, and understood what his cousin was doing. In collaboration, he ordered his own forces out of Alesia, traversing the trenches which they had filled in during the previous engagement, while commanding them to attack the inner wall wherever it appeared weak. This would force Caesar's approximately 70,000 men to simultaneously defend the circumvallation from 80,000 Gauls under Vercingetorix, and the contravallation from 100,000 Gauls under Vercassivellaunus, while keeping them blind to the real point of attack. But Caesar was not stupid. Having mapped out the terrain for both the inner and outer walls, he was well aware of any tactical disadvantage he faced due to the local terrain. Caesar ordered Titus Labienus, with 6 cohorts of cavalry, as well as Decimus Brutus Albinus, with a further 6 cohorts of cavalry, to support the northern section. He sent another legate, Gaius Fabius, accompanied by 7 cohorts, to defend the inner walls against attacks by Vercingetorix. And then, just as he had done when the Nervii attacked his forces at the Battle of the Sabes River, Caesar charged from cohort to cohort, moving men from one position to another, grabbing all available men, putting them in places where the walls were weakening, and personally charging, at the head of his reserves, into the thick of battle, endeavoring to thwart Vercassivellaunus's attempts to overrun the northern wall. Finally, Caesar was out of reserves. Every last man was fighting, doing his best to protect both the outer and inner walls from being breached. Vercassivellaunus's men were building earthworks ramps, which would soon see them pouring over the contravallation. The circumvallation was also breaking down at various points, due to Vercingetorix's onslaughts from within. And the Romans, trapped between 2 walls, had nowhere to flee. Caesar then assumed control of several cohorts of cavalry under Titus Labienus, who was on the verge of collapse. Labienus informed Caesar of his plan to punch through with the cavalry, and pummel the Gauls from behind. Ordering half of Labienus's cavalry to ride with him, and the other half to leave the outer wall and circle around, Caesar ventured to carry out the scheme of Titus Labienus. Knowing what Caesar planned to do, the men, who were, themselves, nearing complete exhaustion, were inspired and renewed. Tossing aside their javelins, they pushed ahead, continuing the battle with their swords, as Caesar smashed through the breach in the contravallation. Before long, Caesar, and his brave cavalry, were seen charging from atop the hill, hitting Vercassivellaunus's forces from the rear. Now completely encompassed by the Romans, Vercassivellaunus's men began to fall. As the Gauls attacking other portions of the wall realized that the brunt of their forces were being vanquished, they pulled back, and began their getaway. Caesar's cavalry rode down many fleeing Gallic soldiers, killing them where caught, but many more escaped, fleeing back to the lands from whence they came. With the Gauls on the outer wall fallen or fleeing, Caesar's remaining legions turned their attention to defending the inner walls, still under attack by Vercingetorix. But Vercingetorix's men could not succeed against the bulk of Caesar's army. Many fell as the Romans fought, driving them further and further back, until what remained of Vercingetorix's army retreated into the town of Alesia. Although Caesar tells us that 250,000 Gauls were killed at the Battle of Alesia, and approximately 40,000 Gauls were captured, such grand estimates served only to magnify his victory when Rome's newsreaders recited Caesar's carefully scripted reports to the populace. Regardless of what is truth, and what is propaganda, there is little doubt that Caesar's forces, trapped between 2 armies, and protected only by the walls which had been built, were outnumbered by a conservative estimate of at least 2 to 1, with less conservative estimates reaching as high as 4 to 1. The following morning, utterly defeated, and knowing they could not stand against Rome's massive siege works, Vercingetorix called another war council, where he proposed they either kill him in order to appease the Romans, or turn him over. But Caesar did not want him killed. The Gauls were ordered to surrender their weapons and their chieftains after the Battle of Alesia. Plutarch tells us that Vercingetorix made a ritual spectacle out of his surrender, by dressing in his best armor, and mounting a beautifully adorned horse. Riding out of Alesia, he circled Caesar's camp, then ceremoniously rode up the entryway. He dismounted before Caesar, where he then stripped off all his armor, and sat down at Caesar's feet. He remained at the feet of Caesar until guards took him away. Vercassivellaunus was also taken prisoner by Caesar, but Cedullo, the chieftain of the Lemuvices, was killed during the battle. With his astounding defeat of Vercingetorix, at the Battle of Alesia, Caesar put an end to the general unification of Gaul. Although he would still face pockets of resistance, Gaul was now pacified. It was time for Caesar to start winning back lost tribes, organizing this newly conquered land into a proper Roman province, and settling more than 50,000 legions on land, so that, as voting citizens of Rome, Caesar could count on their continued support in all upcoming elections.